Hey guys, what is happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph. Sounds kind of cheesy saying that, you know? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph. I feel like I'm on a radio show or something, but anyways, sorry for that. Today, I brought on somebody who's been on the podcast before and another guest. Dan Thompson, you guys might remember. He's a forest fire research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service. He works here in Edmonton. He does research including the physical aspects of forest fire, including modeling wind and sun and thinned and fire-smarted forests, impacts of peatland and muskeg landscapes. He's an adjunct professor for the Department of Renewable Resources at the U of A, and also a partner in the Canadian Partnership for Wildland Fire Science. Yeah, great guy. I had him on before talking about all kinds of aspects of fire. No, so much to talk about regarding wildfires. So, yeah, and then also along with him, I brought on Dave Schroeder. Dave Schroeder gave a little bit of a bio. I asked him to, so you can hear that. He started his wildfire career at FP Innovations. He worked with a bunch of different projects with fuel management, effectiveness research, initiating detection technology research, all kinds of different stuff. He joined the wildfire management branch of the government in 2009. That's where he's working currently as the prescribed fire program coordinator. Yeah, he does all kinds of stuff regarding prescribed fire programs, and he manages forest fuel inventory programs, coordinates prescribed fire research projects, all kinds of different stuff. And that's why we brought them on today. We brought them both on to talk about the Pelican Mountain Research Project, which is the Pelican Mountain Firesmart Fuel Management Research Site. That's what they're calling it. And it's a really interesting site. It's very unique. It's a spot up in northern Alberta where they are trying to do a bunch of different management strategies to a specific area, and they're burning it to see how it burns so they understand how effective certain Firesmart strategies are. Firesmart is a bunch of different things, but in the context of Pelican Mountain, it is fuel management, basically. Try to reduce the risk to reduce burn risk, basically reducing the intensity and the speed of spread and all kinds of stuff like that. So the Pelican Mountain project is really unique in that they have a big chunk of area to play around with and try different things and see what works and try a bunch of different techniques. So that's what I brought them on to talk about today. Both very, very intelligent people. They got a lot to say, a lot of, too much to say in an hour. I find when I usually bring two people on, it goes an hour and a half. So I tried to keep it to a little bit less than that, just for your guys' sake. And but yeah, it was an awesome podcast, and I would love to have them both on again. I hope you guys like it. I got the same three sponsors as usual: Greenlink Forestry, the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and Damaged Timber. Damaged Timber is the apparel company that is helping me out, and they support environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. They have t-shirts, hats, all kinds of really cool stuff. I really like their hats. My favorite hat is there, actually. And yeah, 10% of all their sales goes towards a scholarship for environmental sciences that they're going to give out this fall. I think is the first one. I don't have details on that yet, but that's what he's doing. And yeah, so if you guys are in the market for a cool hat or something, t-shirts, all that kind of stuff, check them out. You can get 10% off at checkout. So go to damagedtimber.com, put in Your Forest 10 at checkout. You can get 10% off. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, without any more messing around, here is Dave, Dan, and myself. Really good conversation regarding Firesmart and fuel management and all kinds of different stuff. We started off not directly talking about Pelican Mountain. I wanted to talk about Firesmart and kind of why it's important, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I hope you guys like it. I really enjoyed it. Love talking to these people. I can't get enough of talking to people that really know very specific stuff about their area of expertise, right? Love it. So, yeah, I hope you guys like it. Here we go. Yeah, so you've been on already once, so you know the drill, but I guess nobody knows you yet. So what's your background, Dave? How do you how'd you get into forestry and all this kind of stuff?
So I started off. I'm from Winnipeg, and I started off working for a few of the local manufacturing companies, and I decided to do a 180.
Yeah.
And go into forestry school.
Nice.
So I enrolled at Lakehead University and started in their diploma program, and then a recession hit, so I kept going and did my undergrad degree.
Yeah.
And then as I finished that, I was offered a stipend to do a master's degree there as well.
Nice.
So I completed that. So 2 years turned into 7.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't take much, eh? Just like you got that curiosity bug.
Yeah, and so I came out of it intact, and then at that time I was working for the Ontario Forest Research Institute in Sault Ste. Marie.
Okay.
And I did some contract work there for a few years, and then I got a job with FP Innovations, which was Ferric at the time, and they had just started up a wildfire operations research group in Hinton.
Yeah.
So we moved from Sault Ste. Marie to Hinton, and I lived there from 2002 to 2009, and then I took a job with Alberta government.
Sweet. That's good.
Yeah.
Right on. So how'd you get into fire? Was that your master's in fire? Or?
Well, it's kind of...
What's your position now, actually? I don't even know.
My formal title is Prescribed Fire Program Coordinator.
Okay.
And I'm a forester.
Right. Okay.
And my career intent was to be a silviculturist.
Nice.
But, and I had no expectation of ever getting into fire, because especially in Ontario, you needed to know somebody.
Yeah.
It seemed like, anyway.
It's probably true.
So, yeah, it was just fortunate that when Ferric had this position come up, they wanted somebody with a forestry background and some other technical background that I also had, that I got from our manufacturing experience. So it was just a good fit.
Sweet.
And I used to be in sales too, so I sweet talked him into it.
That always works, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good skill to have, sweet talking people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm hit and miss.
It worked out really well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into like reading through the link you guys sent me with or whatever, talking about it started off talking about Slave Lake and Fort McMurray burning, right? And the situation leading up to that. We know, but could we explain kind of what the purpose of Firesmart is, and why we need to do that kind of stuff, like what it is and why it's important for towns to start paying attention to this? Because I think a lot of people looked at Slave Lake when it happened and they go, oh, well, it's just a freak accident, it's a one-off, and then 5 years later McMurray happens and you're like, oh, well, again, it's just a freak accident, it's just a one-off, and people aren't seeing that this is a common thread, right? And now we've got like Jasper, all the pine beetle built up all around it, like it's just an accident waiting to happen, right? So I don't know what it takes to get towns to pay attention to this kind of stuff, but I guess a good way to do it is start talking about Firesmart and like what it is and how it can help, why it actually works. Yeah,
and I would argue that towns are paying attention. So
that's good.
That isn't an issue.
Good.
There are places where the attention may be a little deficient, and there may be individual landowners or groups of landowners that are less concerned than others. But really, the Firesmart is something that started after the Chisholm fire in 2001 in Alberta. That's where it started getting its origins. Yeah, and it's model. It started off being modeled a little bit like the Firewise program in the U.S. Similar ideas.
Oh, did Firewise was first?
I couldn't tell you which one was first, but I believe Firewise was started a little bit ahead of what was started here in Canada.
Yeah, okay.
And Firesmart is not just vegetation management. There's 7 disciplines, and I apologize to my manager for not being able to recite them to you.
That's okay. People can look it up. Firesmart, 7 disciplines.
It's education and enforcement and policy and working with insurance companies and fire chiefs and town councils and educating kids and homeowners and it's a whole variety of things, including vegetation management.
Right.
But in Alberta, especially, we are managers of a lot of Crown land, and so we have to mitigate the risk that the vegetation can pose. And so that's where we end up spending a lot of money on vegetation management.
Well, you look at, there were so many northern towns, and not even northern towns, but like western towns close to the Rockies and stuff that are like, there's trees going right up to the town, right? Like right up to the highway, right next to it. So there's a lot. It's not like we have a lot of deserts or anything around here where, there's not as much of a risk. Like there's a lot of towns out there that require this kind of risk management for sure.
Sure. And it's not just forested towns.
No.
So if you remember last fall, we had quite a bit of fire problems in the prairies last fall. And there was a number of homes lost. Yeah. And those were largely grass fires.
Mm-hmm. No, they burn fast and hot, and they just, it doesn't take much.
So we talk about wildland fuels, not forest fuels, because it's everything that can burn next to homes.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Or other buildings.
Yeah.
House to house fire transmission is a bigger cause of ignition than forest fuels themselves.
Yeah, well, you hear people that were fighting some of those fires in like Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, and they tell stories about having to make the decision to bulldoze the house next to, bulldoze the one that's not on fire to save the ones that are going to eventually be on fire. Right? It was done all the time, and it was. Yeah. I can't imagine being the person to try and make that decision, right? But that was, it's wild.
Yeah, I think when you're in that position, faced with no other choice, you
just do what has to be done. You
just have to do it.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's the thing. I think people they might look at fire and they think that it's literally the like wicking of the flames hitting the houses or stuff like that, right? But a lot of cases it's just ash flying over and landing on rooftops, and that's what's starting it, right? Like I know with Slave Lake, one of the first things to go up was right in the middle of town.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, so it's hard for people to understand what's going on there, right? But it's those ashes can go like how far let's say embers can fly now. It's like kilometers potentially, right?
It is. Yeah. I think Australia has documented flying ember going around 8 to 10 kilometers.
Yeah, and in a science perspective, a lot of our tools, the sort of day-to-day tools, and when we talk about fire, we often are talking about, okay, this fire in the forest or in the grass, like you were saying, is going to get, to this many hectares, or it's going to go this many kilometers along the wind direction of X and Y.
Yeah.
And that's great if you're trying to map on where the forest fire is going to go. Mm. But we don't have great tools right now to say, oh, but this is the spotting distance, or it's going to hit this stand that we thinned and pruned the branches to 6 feet, and that's going to change the fire behavior. We have some concepts of that, or, we did this treatment over here. We underburned the jack pine over here, and that means that we're going to have less fire in the big crowns and canopies of the tree, and then therefore, it's the communities at a lower risk of spotting, and those are the big. I think we have a good understanding by and large, and Dave, being one of the experienced fire behavior analysts in the province, you could probably affirm here that we often can tell where the fire is going to go, but that wall of flames might go here. But, where that firebrand's going to go, where that spot fire is going to end up, or how the forest fire is going to react to this strange fuel type. Oh, it's trees that got blown down a little while over here 10 years ago, or it's an area that there's a bunch of mulch because they have an oil and gas facility. There are sort of uncertainties, and that's sort of where a lot of the community protection has a lot of these sort of complex factors that are standard. Our if you talk to any firefighter, our literal red book that says, okay, today the fire is going to go at 500 meters an hour. Yeah. We don't have stuff about spot fire distances and what it's going to do in that pruned jack pine stand. Those are some of those cases that our tools aren't up to date with the state of our communities and the forests surrounding them right now.
Yeah, and for people that don't know, it's just explain that red book is basically just a bunch of different fuel types, and it says at different humidities and different environment or weather situations, how that fuel might burn.
Exactly.
So
and we call it the Red Book, and it says, if the weather today is this, and you're in a pine stand, the fire is going to go this many meters an hour, sort of thing. And that's our standard, and that's most of the time what people are worried about. If you're far in the woods, you want to say, okay, well, the fire today, over 4 hours of burning, it's going to go this many kilometers or this many meters, and that's fine. But when you're dealing with the interface of that forest and a community, everything is so much more complex than our little 20-page red book has to say, right? And so that's where we need some more of those tools.
Right. So that's where this Pelican Mountain project is coming in. That's the idea of it, right? Is you guys are doing this Pelican Mountain project where you're doing unconventional stuff and seeing how it burns, or you guys explain it?
I mean, I think what we're doing is we're doing exactly what is conventional, but isn't in that red book, isn't in our standard tools for decision support. We're trying to catch the science up with at least what we're doing in Alberta. And I mean, I work for the Canadian Forest Service, so we sort of try to be a little bit more regional and national, but really stuff that we see in the Western Boreal Forest. And really focusing in on those more volatile fuel types and the types that aren't maybe finding a value in being harvested, or aren't maybe those of the most aesthetic value, and taking those fuel types and that type of forest and saying, okay, what has been done out there that maybe we don't know fully what the impacts of this treatment, and by treatment I mean putting in crews and limbing things, or putting in a mulcher or some sort of machinery in there. And what are the impacts compared to if it hadn't been treated at all? And there's lots of communities where that has been done out there, and maybe we don't fully understand what the implications of those, how much do we really gain? How much of an advantage is there in pruning branches to 6 feet? We know it's a good thing, but maybe it has a different meaning when the winds are calm or when the humidity is a little bit higher or lower. There's all sorts of factors out there, a lot of complexities, and what we the larger we, myself as a researcher, and a bunch of folks at the province and the fire behavior analysis and at the regional level of folks like those in Slave Lake, sort of said, okay, we need a place where we can do a lot of these experiments and have a safe place to do it. We really can't do this next to town because maybe something unexpected happens, and we want to experimentally burn under conditions that are pretty close. I mean, they're not going to be the Slave Lake conditions where the winds are 100 kilometers an hour.
I hope not.
but maybe the conditions about Fort McMurray, hot, dry, moderately windy. Is there a safe space where we can do these experiments where it wouldn't be safe to do it next to town, but we're in the same sort of forest?
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask if you guys were actually burning in the same conditions where we would be worried about something coming to town, like extreme or high hazard situations, right? And it's
it's extreme.
So that's the plan,
but not like Dan said, not to the point where it's 70 kilometer an hour winds. No. And I mean, those conditions happen so infrequently, we'd be waiting another 10 years to do the test burn.
No, of course, just a high hazard, regular high hazard situation. But so what kind of how do you guys ensure? Or what kind of precautions do you take to make sure that something doesn't take off? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of precautions, right? So how many burns have you guys done so far?
Well,
because it's only been around a few years now, right? Like
maybe I can give a little bit of context on this.
Yeah,
so when I was with Ferric, now FP Innovations, we were able to continue using the International Crown Fire Modeling Experiment site in the Northwest Territories.
Okay.
So that was a CFS NWT-led program, and that wound down in the very early 2000s, just as the fire research group or the fire operations research group was getting going. So the NWT offered us to continue using that site, and it was there where we did our first tests in boreal fuel. So we had a number of mature jack pine stands where we did some thinning, and we cleaned them up as the Firesmart guidebook would recommend.
Okay.
And we were able to do a couple of ignitions in the mid-2000s where we lit a fire that became a crown fire and burned it into these jack pine stands.
Yeah.
And it changed the fire dramatically.
Right.
So we had this very active crown fire
In uncontrolled forest.
In a natural stand.
Right.
And then it would enter this thin stand, this
Yeah.
Firesmart stand, and then within 30 meters, it would just peter out.
Really?
But there would be spot
Sweet.
embers
Yeah.
had lit trees up all over the place. And individual trees in the treatment would still be candling,
Yeah.
torching off. So there was still fire in there
Yeah.
in the stands, but the crews could go in and suppress them.
Way more manageable.
So it was a very good result for jack pine stands.
Yeah. Which is notoriously burn hot and quick.
Well,
right?
yeah, they are fire dependent. Well, they're fire adapted species, and they do very well in the boreal
Yeah.
fire regime.
Small dry needles burn easy. It's kind of like matchsticks.
Yeah. so we did those burns in the mid 2000s, and FP Innovations is still continuing to do work at that site on those different kinds of treatments. And then in 2011, after the Slave Lake complex of fires, there was a report commission, and one of the recommendations was to study ways of mitigating fire hazard from black spruce.
Right.
So
Specifically fuel management and yeah.
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 So FP Innovations and the province, and specifically the Slave Lake forest area, got together and developed a number of projects to look at economics of fuel treatments and fuel loads and those kind of things. And we wanted to start doing test burns as well.
Yeah.
So then we developed a site, and Dan came in as well from the Canadian Forest Service, and we developed a site just outside of Red Earth Creek.
Right.
In 2015, we were able to do a test burn there, and it was very successful. It was those extreme conditions that Dan talked about.
Okay.
And we've got some fantastic results, but deemed that we needed a different site. So it was good, but it was a little too close to town. But the folks of Red Earth were fantastic. They were very supportive.
Yeah.
But we saw that we needed a different site, something that was a bit more remote and offered us more opportunities. So, and was fantastic because the Slave Lake Forest area folks they saw that need right away.
Yeah.
And really they were leading the charge on helping us to find this Pelican Mountain site,
Yeah.
which we did in 2015, and then we started working on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's mostly I've looked at a few photos or whatever, the maps you guys have. So it's mostly like a black spruce bog, right? So it's which is, well, you guys know it's the like one of the most fastest and like most risky burn types, right? Like it's just it's one that we're always worried about because it just takes off, right? It's got so much fuel and everything. But is there some upland sites in there too, or is it all just lowland?
Yeah, the actual location is basically far removed from the towns of Sandy Lake and Wabasca. So it's about 350 kilometers north of Edmonton, or so, and then it's still a good 20 or 30 kilometers from the nearest community, and it is sort of a big blob of a bog there with all mostly black spruce, and then in between the community, the nearest two communities and even the major highway, there's lots of aspen and ponds and marshes and a lot of fuel breaks. So it's
right,
and that was selected by the Slave Lake.
So if a fire does take off in that black spruce, that if it hits the aspen, it's definitely going to at least slow down and give you a chance to.
Yeah. And there's been some recent harvest activity as well.
Yeah,
with
the area is part of LPAC's forest management area, and they were great because this was in their long-term plan.
Yeah,
and the Slave Lake folks asked if they could change their schedule and harvest around our site.
Nice.
And in a short notice, and they were tremendous. They agreed to that, and the harvesting got done within a year.
So that's as another fuel break, or a part of the study, like you want to try and burn through a cut block type situation.
Well, again, it's mostly as a break, an area where we expect some embers to land,
Right.
but we'll be able to put those fires out very quickly.
Gotcha.
And already the returning aspen is quite dense and it's growing like crazy.
It comes back.
It's gonna be really tall after all the rain we've had this year.
No
so
kidding.
so that really helped us in preparing the site. Your question earlier about how do we set these things up?
Yeah.
Well, one of them was to create lots of defensible space because we know that we're going to have long range embers from these fires. So by having this improved access, thanks to the alpac, leaving some of their trails behind, and having some of that wood harvested really helps.
Yeah.
And then your other question about, is it just black spruce? Well, they did leave us about 20 hectares of aspen, so we can, and we do have some plans to do some burns in there. And they did leave us a bit of unmanaged debris as well.
Oh, okay.
So we intend as part of this project to do some test burns in aspen debris, which is one of, when Dan was talking about the incompleteness of the FBP or the fire behavior prediction system and all the fuel types.
Yeah.
Well, there's some additional data we can get. And we are also establishing new debris management standards especially for around communities, right next to communities. So we can see what we can do test burns and debris that's been managed to those standards as well.
For sure. So most of the fuel types that we have that's in the red book right now, they're all standing fuel types basically, right? And they're unmanaged standing fuel types, or what? I forget. I haven't looked at the red book in a while. I have one actually in my office.
Yeah,
I still haven't
it's
looked
the sort
at
of thing that every crew leader, I think, pretty much in Alberta and most.
I think everyone gets it.
Oh, do the crew members do? Okay.
Yeah, I think everyone gets it. I think you get it in in membership training.
Oh, is that right?
One of the first
Okay, in
things they
Alberta.
give you.
Oh, yeah,
They're like, study this. Know
Other
this.
jurisdictions might only give it to the every third or fourth crew member as the crew leader or something.
Yeah.
But regardless, so we have. We do have some slash fuel types, so that, sort of forest harvest debris.
Yeah.
But to Dave's point, those are, we have some from British Columbia, and then some from sort of pine and balsam, I think, sort of slash.
Gotcha.
From Eastern Canada. But that's silvicultural practices of the 1970s and early
Cut
80s.
Skid.
Yeah, much different slash configuration.
Very, very, a lot higher fuel load than you'd find in any sort of. And I'm not an actual registered forester, so I'll leave any of the stuff on harvest, processing, and stuff like that to Dave. And then in terms of the standing tree fuel types, we largely have, for spruce, which is, spruce trees come in all sorts of flavors. We have the short black spruce that, we have in a lot of wetlands or sort of next to stream areas.
I used to think they were ugly. Now I think they're charismatic.
They have a certain character to them, And I see in the studio here, you have some really nice sort of white spruce and Engelmann spruce, which is maybe the more...
Both these pictures are definitely not from Alberta.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of there's one in the corner here that looks a little more boreal.
Oh, yeah, that could be.
And of course, it's a faux pas to ever mention visual objects on a podcast. But, you can imagine your standard sort of Rockies landscape. That would be, maybe an Engelmann spruce, which is very similar to a white spruce, or in my front yard, sort of spruce tree that you'll plant in the city. It's a big tree. It can be 40, 50 feet tall really easily. And those sorts of trees, all the way down to those scraggly little things you might see in some little muskeg area or something, in some sort of wet area next to a pond or something like that.
Yeah.
And that all gets lumped into sort of being the same sort of spruce trees. And we don't have a lot of
variation in that.
In that, and we also don't have. And anytime we do anything to that, so if we take even those 10-foot tall spruce trees, and we say to some fire crews, okay, we'll go and take your chainsaws in the winter, and we just want to have a gap of maybe 6 feet between the pine needles and the spruce needles on the ground and the first branches, and now the flames are going to have to be bigger. And in our system, that red book system that we hand out to the crew members, we just assume that all the forest there is totally natural and totally unaltered, other than that slash. Because in the 80s, when we did a lot of these first experimental burns and built this whole numerical predictive system for the firefighters, there wasn't a lot of this thinning and fire smarting going on. Is either you had a cut block where you had standing natural trees, and that in between space where we're doing stuff to the forest that isn't just cutting all the trees down and hauling them off.
Yeah.
With that in between type is what we're trying to really capture.
Totally.
So doing things that are and the black spruce trees in Alberta aren't something that a lot of those forest companies are striving after. So there's not a lot of economic incentive other than, say, for firewood to, and even then the trees are almost too small to really be bothered for firewood.
Most of it's pulled out of the land base as a merchantable thing.
Yeah. And if you're talking the big aspen or even big jack pine, then okay, maybe there's an incentive to bring that to the nearest mill. But for the black spruce, there's lots of stems, they're really little, so you might as well leave it on the landscape. And if it's, there's protections for wildlife we have to think about now.
Well, it's not operable, it's wet. You can't get a
machine
in there
exactly.
even
You put a skidder in there and it's going to go, go halfway up to the treads, right? So there's a lot of incentives there to do a lot to just modify the fuels in the landscape, but we don't have any guidance about how much does it cost, how much time does it take to clear a hectare of land. How many crew hours does that take? What's that going to do to the fire behavior? What is the resulting vegetation going to look like? So we needed a really focused landscape.
Gotcha.
The stuff Dave was mentioning before in the Northwest Territories was fantastic. It was in terms of understanding jack pine and maybe a pine and spruce mix in a really dry, sort of sandy soil. But in Alberta, our black spruce, just like in Slave Lake and in Fort McMurray and those sort of valley bottom systems where it's white spruce and a bit of black spruce and a bit of an older mixed wood. But especially in a lot of Alberta, there's often next to town a little ravine or a little wet area with a pond or a little riparian zone next to the river there that has that sort of spruce fuel type, and it's expensive to do stuff to it, and so you want to do that with care and knowledge.
People get upset too, right? Like people see you
where you're going to walk your dog.
Stuff. They get upset.
And so we just don't have the tools to say what you need to do down in that black spruce by the pond is to bring in the winter fire crew and thin the branches to 6 feet. And that's going to cost you $10,000 a hectare. And it's going to do X and Y to your fire behavior. The fire is going to, just like Dave was saying, okay, the prescription in pine, I think, is a little bit more understood. If we thin the trees out and prune, okay, well, that crown fire is all of a sudden going to drop down to a surface fire. And in the spruce and some of these other fuel types, there's more questions, and we needed somewhere to prove that. And we needed a safe sort of experimental area where we can do this and that and X and Y treatments and test it out and provide some guidance, because this is a fuel type just like Slave Lake that is next to so many towns in the boreal, and it's a high risk, like you say, and it's that volatile fuel type. The branches are right low to the ground, and it just takes a little bit of fire, and the sun gets in there and the wind gets it there, and the stuff is really dry and it takes off. So
even the ground too, right? You get that moss on the ground. And if it's been dry for 3 weeks and the water table's down, like it's just going to be, you can step on it and it crunches and it turns into dust. So like it burns so crazy fast.
Exactly. Yeah. So we need a space to really explore that volatile fuel type that is sort of everywhere and sort of work from there.
So just so for people understand why, so I think it might be confusing for people when they're thinking about, a forest, and then all of a sudden you have a fire-smarted forest, kind of in quotations, with the 6 feet. Say you have all the vegetation from 6 feet gone. So there's no understory shrub. There's no, all the branches are tied up. Why would that stop a crown fire when it hits it? Because you'd think the crowns are still intact. It would still burn. But my understanding is that all of a sudden the fire is still happening on the ground and heat goes up. And when it hits that, now the base of that fire is now no longer existent, right? That's kind of the idea. So you get rid of the connection between the ground and the top of the tree.
That's exactly it. Right? And there's a bit of thinning that often goes on in there as well.
There can be a fair bit. If it's very dense, then there can be quite a bit of spacing.
Right.
And it's mostly those very small stems that are cut.
Right.
And then the crews will usually they'll cut them down, pile them, and burn them in situ along with the branches that they've pruned off.
Yeah.
But your point about stopping the crown fire is very important. And we don't promote the idea that these fires or these kind of treatments will stop a fire on their own, because we haven't removed all the vegetation.
Makes it manageable, right?
That's right. So in this, but the idea is that you would stop a crown fire, and that would enable suppression to be effective. In whether that's from air or if there's sprinklers that's been pre-deployed, or in some cases there may be ground crews. And we do have some very well documented case studies from Saskatchewan where there were Firesmart treatments next to communities, and they had resources on the ground plus air support, and the crews reported that the Firesmart treatments enabled them to get in on the ground with that air support. Now they're next to a lake too, so they got lots of water.
Right.
But it improved their sight lines. It improved their ability to move through the forest, and there was no raging crown fire. There was lots of spot fires that they could put out. So we have documented evidence in addition to the pine stands that it does work.
Yeah.
We don't know what the limits are though. So those fires, those case studies in Saskatchewan were at up to a certain set of conditions. So that being the wind speed, a certain temperature and humidity, and those things all create more volatile conditions as they increase or decrease. So we want to explore what is the fire behavior at more extreme conditions than what they documented.
Yep, that makes sense. So you were saying before that you go through and remove these branches from up to 6 feet kind of thing and burn them. But the other option is like mulching them, right? Like you guys will mulch stuff. So mulching being basically just with a cat or whatever, a piece of machinery that goes through and just mulches it up into little wood chips kind of thing, right?
It's a bulldozer with a giant steel drum.
Yeah.
Steel tooth drum on the front.
It just beats the shit out of it.
And it's wonderful tool for oil and gas. The seismic industry has really benefited from using those kind of tools, and they are used for Firesmart treatment. It costs less to do, but the difference between mulching and using crews to do it is that you're converting fuel. So you're taking a standing tree and shredding it up and putting all that stuff on the ground. Right. Whereas a hand crew is actually removing fuel by piling it and burning it.
So I know you guys are doing a bunch of mulching in the Pelican Mountain, right? So I know you guys haven't done the burns yet in some of those areas that you're mulching, but what do you predict to have happen? Because like in my mind, when I think about if it's mulched, you're going to have 2 or 3 inches of mulch. It's going to hold on to a lot of moisture, so it would take a lot longer for it to dry out. I would think it would slow things down. But when I was talking to Jordan earlier, he was saying that might not be the case. So what's the predictions going into it with the mulch versus the removal? You think that the removal is better ultimately?
For sure.
Yeah.
But we have done some test burns in mulch fuel.
Okay, you have. Okay.
So part of this is another thing that we can do at Pelican Mountain.
Yeah.
And also a few other sites that we have worked at in Alberta is we want to get some understanding of how mulch burns.
Right.
In the same context of other fuel types.
Yeah.
How does wind speed and temperature and humidity affect how fast the fire moves through it? So we have done a couple of test burns at Pelican Mountain, and those are really valuable data points. And there's some things to be learned from fighting mulch fires that are valuable for operations folks.
Right, but it's probably all depends on the situation, I'm guessing, like everything in forestry.
So you won't have a crown fire,
right? Because
it's all shredded up on the ground.
Okay,
but it is very intense fire.
Really? Okay, so it just burns hot and
you need lots of water to put it out.
Gotcha.
So it's not something you can just tackle. It's not like a grass fire where maybe you can get at it with some Wajax, like hand pumps and backpack water sprayers.
Right.
Yeah.
So you need a lot more because it is thick. If it does light, then it's going to be a lot harder to put out, I guess.
For sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
But you're right. I mean, just in the same way that one mulches your garden to sort of, keep out weed competition and hold in water and things. under many circumstances, it does hold on to water pretty well. So we do see, the very surface will dry out in the sun, but then everything, an inch or more below it stays pretty wet until it gets really dry. Okay. So we have some times we've measured that, and Pelican Mountain is another place that we've measured that in the foothills and stuff before.
So it's a lot, but it's a lot cheaper to mulch, though. Obviously, I'm guessing. I just know, like around Slave Lake, almost everything's been mulched around the town, right? Like there was a lot of removal too, but most of it's been.
They've done quite
a
blend of things.
Yeah,
and part of what we're doing with this Pelican Mountain work, and a few other sites that we did work on around Slave Lake, is to have FP Innovations come out and put their equipment on or do their detail timing tests. So they're building up a repository of data to show what the productivity is.
Oh, okay.
And mulching has often been very dependent on what the price of oil is.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So if the price of oil is high, the cost of mulching is also high.
No, obviously, yeah.
And it can be quite a dramatic change in cost.
Okay.
But it is significantly less expensive than doing things by hand crews, for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. It's just So what other treatments are going on there? You guys are mulching. Is there anything else going on that's unique to Pelican Mountain that you guys are going to test out?
So the site there it's about 90 hectares.
Okay.
And quite a bit of that is quite wet, so it's probably unusable. But I'd say about half is potentially usable for test burns.
Okay.
And so with thinning, thin pile, prune, burn, we can look at what's the density, what's the residual density after we're finished. So the more thinning we have to do, the more it costs. So is there an optimal amount of thinning that we can do? So we can look at that.
Gotcha.
And then we can look at the pattern. So in thinning, typically it's easiest for the crews. You just say space the trees to this density,
right?
And they're usually fairly close.
Yeah,
they're fairly consistent.
Yeah.
And there's lots of experienced people out there that do this work.
For sure.
With mulching, you can do strip mulching. You can do a grid pattern. One of the things that we're exploring is using an irregular cluster type pattern.
Okay.
So that might be beneficial in terms of sight lines and visual aesthetics
for predator reasons and stuff, and habitat and
sure. And it may allow you to actually mulch more fuel without compromising concerns that residents may have about how their forest looks. So that's something that we're exploring at that site, and Dan's also working on a fire behavior modeling experiment where it shows that those can be actually quite useful, and maybe a lot more beneficial than strip mulching.
Okay.
And strip mulching was something that we had done in our 2015 burn at Red Earth. Yeah. And the fire went right through it.
Really? So it didn't slow it down much, eh?
It was. We measured a difference, but
which way was the mulching happening? Was it perpendicular or parallel to the burn?
That one was perpendicular.
Oh, okay.
2015, but
and it didn't slow down, eh?
The mulch strips were only about 4 meters across, or 4 meters wide, and the flames breached it.
Just licked across, yeah.
And the trees were 10, 12 meters tall, right?
Right.
So you can imagine that those little strips of mulch are actually quite narrow compared to the size of the trees, right?
Oh, okay.
So once the one bank of trees was on fire, once the flames moved over in the wind, they just touched the next 4 meters across, and it was...
So strip mulching, not necessarily a good idea.
Well, you might have to go to such wide strips that it's not really...
You're just cutting, yeah.
And there was a difference in the fire behavior in the sense that there's less fuel in the canopy
slows it
and
down.
the grounds. And even if you slow it down a little bit, there's all sorts of other factors. How effective would the helicopters with water buckets or any sort of air tanker as well if they're dropping water from above the more open canopy, and you can wet that mulch down really quickly from the air.
True, and it holds on to the moisture.
And
right?
it holds on to the moisture for a while too. Like Dave mentioned before, visibility, being able to put in a sprinkler line or just move around quickly.
Yeah.
Those are sort of more intangible sort of aspects, especially around like moving in sight and can you see that little spot fire 50 meters away versus 5 meters away? Hey, like that's a big difference, right? So there are real advantages in there, and I think the Saskatchewan case studies do tell us that there is some advantages, but it all comes down to cost and benefit, and the costs and benefits. The costs are not purely just economic. They have to do with habitat and predations. We don't want big lines in the forest for wolves to be predating caribou, for instance. That's a big priority issue. Or if that's something near town, do we really want that regular spacing? Is that the aesthetics that we want? Those are also costs.
Yep.
Versus the benefits are mostly we're looking at the benefits in terms of fire behavior, but maybe it's also just that you can walk through that faster to put a spot fire out.
Yep.
So the costs and the benefits aren't just purely in dollars and meters per minute of the fire moving through it, but also sort of all the other dimensions, and that's why we do things like how many crew hours does it take to clear a hectare? Okay, well that has a cost associated. So you can build all of this stuff together and start to say, okay, well, near town, maybe we want to do this thing where we're going to just take the clusters of where the forest is naturally thin and just enhance that. And maybe that's the right prescription. Maybe it's a little more expensive because we're sort of having to zigzag around to the little natural openings. But if we're doing something that's protecting an oil and gas installation, it doesn't have to be as pretty.
Right.
So we can do another type of treatment, and we can get into the costs and benefits sort of through it there as well. So we're trying to not just understand just fire behavior, but as much as we can, all the sort of different elements that go into that.
That's the way to do it. If you just look at one thing and kind of put the blinders on, it becomes useless information.
Yeah, and even as it comes down to what's that forest going to turn into. So we've set up some long-term experiments, and is there a way that by thinning the forest we can promote an understory plant community? Stuff like mosses that like the bright sunshine that comes in when you thin the forest out. And if those mosses are naturally less flammable, then hey, all the better. So, there's a whole bunch of work that's gone into, what's that vegetation community going to be in the future, and measurements from crews from the province and some peatland eco-hydrology folks from McMaster University.
Nice. So it's a big project. There's a lot.
It is, yeah. There's lots. When you get into just the operations, you have the province, you have Alpac, just sort of doing the sort of nuts and bolts. But then
it's not just fuel management; it's actually just the potential and modeling and everything, right?
Yeah, so it's, folks like myself at the Canadian Forest Service doing more of the fire behavior side, and for these, even for the small mulch burns we've done, we've had folks in the air doing infrared video of how hot the fire is at different points in time, and all sorts of measurements of the wind flow right at the ground level, sort of at 2 or 3 feet above the surface. We thin the forest, we change how the wind moves through there. Well, more wind maybe complicates how
changes it, definitely.
and but there's more smoke moving. You can ventilate more smoke, which is nice. But maybe the forest is a little bit drier because you had more air moving through there, right? So we're trying to capture all the sort of different
that's awesome
elements in there. So it's definitely not a when we ramp up activities in the spring and in May of a given year, there's lots of different colored pieces of fire uniforms out there, and lots of different colored hard hats, and it's a lot of coordination effort. So there's folks like Dave and with folks in the Slave Lake district who spend a big chunk of time in the winter just making sure that, okay, this block is this type of experiment, we're going to burn it in this many years, and we have to write the contract so that the mulcher thins it this way, and then we're going to put moss plugs in there, and and I won't bore you with the details of the moss ecology, but or just something like tamarack or larch, depending on where you're from. A less flammable species, right? Because it's, even though it's got those needles, they flush out every year, so they're 4 times wetter than spruce needles, and they don't burn really well at all. So, what can we do in these wetland areas to promote something like larch? And Dave can maybe talk a little bit more about
immediately
that.
close to town.
Yeah. And the larch and the spruce sort of grow in sometimes the same habitat. So if we can promote the less flammable tree species, hey, maybe that's a big gain.
It'd be interesting because bogs, like pure black spruce bogs tend to be nutrient poor, kind of stagnant water, right? Whereas the larch is found in the richer fens where you've got movement and you've got flow, right? So I'd be interested to see the success rate on getting larch to take hold in some of those places to try and reduce flammability.
But we grow larch just at the sort of side of my forestry center in Edmonton here. Like it's if you plant it, like a lot of trees, like if you give it that, not just hope it grows, but if you plant it, maybe we can plant these things in maybe an environment where they're less competitive. If you just sort of let nature take its course. But if we plug in a 2-foot tall larch tree. Yeah. And maybe that's going to take off and become and around a community, that's maybe something that's a viable
that's just
solution.
Right? It's not like you're doing it throughout the whole forest. You're just doing this immediately close to town where the hazard is, the hazard's high. So
Exactly.
Okay. So I was going to ask you guys, I think people might wonder why, how big, like how much fire smarting should be done around a town. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so is it only, you know what I mean? Are you doing a 100 meter strip of fire smart? Are you doing a kilometer? Are you doing 3 kilometers? Like it obviously varies, but what do you guys think is
every community before work starts, the community undertakes a planning process, and often that's with the help of a consultant who's got fire experience, and they'll identify areas where some kind of vegetation management should take place,
right?
And that's always situational.
Of course, changes.
So how much should be done? The Firesmart has a notion that they promote the idea that there are a couple of zones that you should have. So, 10 meters away from your house should be fuel free. Yeah, and that means firewood,
wood chips in your garden.
Yeah, everything,
mulch in your garden.
Yeah.
Right?
And then 30 meters should be mostly vegetation free. But you can still have trees and stuff in there. But a well manicured lawn or potato patch. Yeah, so I'm a gardener. Yeah, far more is really advisable. And then 100 meters away from a house is where you should be doing a lot of the kind of work that's the kind of work that we're actually testing at Pelican Mountain, where you're doing thinning or mulching or perhaps some kind of species conversion,
getting rid of the understory,
managing the species. Yeah. So that's something that Firesmart Canada really advocates, and there's lots of data to show that what they call that home ignition zone, that's super critical. Right. If you walk around your house and you see where all the dust is settled from wind eddies and so on, well, that's where embers are going to land.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I know my mom's a forest educator out of Slave Lake, and she has a little Firesmart program that she does with the kids and stuff, right? She has a little Tupperware container with like a house, like a Lego house, and she's got some toothpicks with like lint on it or something as trees, right? And she's got it all modeled, right? And then she sets it on fire, and she's got one that's the like natural, and then the one that's the fire smarted, right? And it really, you can see the kids, like, their eyes open. They go, oh, wow. Like, they actually see the difference, right? But I think that's good for adults to see that, too, because I think they might see these treatments and go, like, what the hell is that going to do? We can still go through the crown, but the connection's not there to get it, right? So, so, like, high hazard places like, say, like Hinton or Swan Hills or whatever, how much of a buffer do you think around the town that would be effective for them to like do, say, because like I mean it's mostly conifer species around there, right? Like there's not as much aspen, so basically all around the town needs to be kind of managed somehow,
and
right?
within the town,
totally.
A lot of the work is done within the town, and then they'll look at, well, what's the historical weather patterns? So if a lot of times our Slave Lake is a great example. You look at the historical fire map, and it's these early spring fires with strong southeast winds.
I don't know what it is about Slave Lake, but it just brings the shit weather every time. Like, it's just, you look at the concentration of fires every year on the fire map, right? It's all centered around Slave Lake and just kind of swirls around.
They all have the same orientation, though, like they were saying.
Yeah. So you can look at those kind of data and say, well, I should concentrate the few whatever dollars I have to spend on this or community outreach I have. I should focus on that part of the community.
Yeah.
First, most and foremost.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But you have to make sure that inside town is taken care of.
Big time.
We talk, I mentioned look for where the dust collects around your house. Look for where it collects around your fence and your neighbor's shed, because if that starts on fire, that'll get your house going just as easily as the ember right at the base of your house.
Well, and the materials on the house too, right? Like if you have cedar shake, or you've got normal shingles, or if you've got like whatever stucco versus whatever you got, right? Like there's different, like, I mean, the cedar shake obviously is going to light on fire easily. Even normal shingles are pretty bad for that, right? You got the tar, right? And then, but if you had like a stucco house, so you got rock and you got a tin roof, you're way less likely to collect an ember and have bad things happen, right? So
yeah, and often you're in this strange zone if you look at a community like Fox Creek, where the legal limits of the municipality are this little postage stamp, and then right on the edge of the community is provincial lands.
Yeah,
and that's where that Firesmart continuum, like Dave was talking about, those zones, right? So the province or the sort of wildfire management folks, they would have a hard time saying, hey, you clean up your brush pile or something like that. It's more of a bylaw, municipal thing. But what they can do is, let's do something to that, those big pine trees at the edge of Fox Creek to make them less flammable, so that there's less firebrands coming into the community, right? And if we can reduce the fuel load or improve the ability to suppress the fire in the forest near the community, that just is another layer of space and protection. And so but obviously money is always limited. So how can we do this the most efficient way? What's the highest risk forest cover type that we have around there? And then what's the most economical thing we can do to it? We're trying to balance the cost per hectare with the effectiveness. We can do something that's $10 a hectare, but if it doesn't do anything, what's the point? So there's this, and that's where folks like the economists would be able to tell you, okay, well, they'll take all that cost data and all that effectiveness data, and maybe they'll find us a little sweet point. And neither Dave or I are economists.
That's okay. Neither am I, surprisingly enough.
but without really robust data about, the fire is now half as fast, or the flames are half as tall, and then we can say, oh, you know what? When the flames are less than 3 feet, okay, well, that's when the individual firefighters with a fire pump and a charged water line can go in and put that out. Yeah. But if the flames are 10 feet tall, then you know what? It's out to lunch, right? Yeah, no, for sure. And so we can, tell the economists those specific sort of thresholds, and they can say, oh, okay, well, if we do this, we'll have a higher, if we do this forest treatment at this cost, we'll have a better chance of bringing the flames down to those heights that are manageable at the edge of towns, so that there's, less firebrands coming into town. And then the, removal in that immediate home ignition zone is that, but if all those things don't come in sync, then the odds of success are just that much smaller. Like you have to,
the whole system.
And including that forest fire that happened 20 kilometers away from town, that, maybe that was something that they had a fire that got to a few hundred hectares, but they held it. Well, that black area, even if that fire burned 10 years ago, the odds of a really intense wildfire coming through it are just that much lower. So, or maybe that was an area that there was, some harvesting and they burned off the logging debris. Yeah. Well, let me tell you, even the mulch that we burned in 2017, we tried to burn it again in 2018, just sort of black. We just sort of blackened the surface of that mulch. Right. And you came back this year, and there's all sorts of stuff growing in it, and it's all super wet. And then 5 meters away, there's mulch that hadn't been burned, and it's just as crispy dry as the other day. So, we're learning about what, can we just do these little tiny surface burns in mulch maybe, and maybe that will buy us some extra space. Or
do you see the height of flames with the mulch that you do with grass, or does it lessen those flame heights a little bit too?
It's pretty low.
Depends, obviously. Again,
depends. If you've got,
I'm just thinking about,
you've got 2 meter tall Calomagrostis with a 20-kilometer wind behind it, then
Yeah, you're going to have 8, 10-foot, 12-foot
you won't have, you wouldn't get those same flame lengths or flame heights.
So that might be
mulch.
helpful, yeah.
But we did notice that when the wind got behind it a little bit, it would get...
So it could still wick up to the 6-foot mark and
for
and
sure,
tip off
yeah.
even in the Firesmarted spruce or pine.
Yeah,
or whatever.
and
Okay.
there's more fuel burning.
Right, so it burns hotter and longer, and so it has more opportunity.
It's a bit more
probably.
intense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it does take a long time to dry out. So
Yeah.
it's, unlike a grass fuel where,
Dries in
2
10, 20
sunny,
minutes.
windy days, and or not even 2, sometimes just 1.
It's hot enough and
Sunny, windy
enough.
day. Like it can rain the day before, and the next day that grass can go.
I forget where it was, but someone was talking to me about how long it took to dry out the fine fuel in this one area. This one day it was totally saturated, and an hour later it was dry and ready to burn, right? If it's windy enough and hot enough, it just
That's
it's crazy.
fine grass, right?
Yeah.
Versus this mulch, and maybe that's one of those other aspects that we haven't fully explored yet is, by having more of this sort of mulch treatment or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It will dry, but it might take till June till it's dry enough to really burn.
No, of course, yeah.
Really vigorously. So maybe all we're doing is that if we're breaking up instead of it just being all grass or whatever, or that sort of spruce forest, which is fairly flammable. Once you have those few hot, dry, and windy days, and if that mulch, if it takes a few more weeks, maybe we're just taking out of sync the flammability of the different parts of the landscape, and maybe that's one of the things that we're accomplishing there too. Right?
Yeah, a lot of stuff to consider for sure.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
we haven't got there yet in this sort of long project, but
there's lots of things
to come.
that Pelican Mountain will tell us.
It's a unique project, right? Like I haven't heard of. I mean, you said there's a few other projects going on where you're testing out Firesmart and fuels and stuff like that, but it sounds like it's unique and the amount of options you have.
Yeah, there's not many places where you can do research with crown fires.
Right.
It's a risky business. So
big time.
Yeah.
So you guys must have hack crews and stuff on standby, and I mean in those days they're on standby anyways when it's a high hazard, but you must have some kind of. Yeah.
We have a really great arrangement with the Slave Lake Forest area folks. So they take care of the operations, and they're very thorough about preparing ahead of time.
Everyone
and
knows
that allows us in the research side of things to make sure that we collect the data that we need, and then we're all in sync. When it gets to burn day, everyone's ready to go.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm sure you get the hack crews all jacked up and excited too, right? They're probably going around looking for spot fires, training for something to action, right? Yeah,
it's all good training. So this year we were getting ready to do a test burn, and so they were out setting up a sprinkler perimeter around it, and
it is awesome training. Yeah.
So they didn't come up with enough pump power at first, so they had to make some adjustments and so on, and it was a great learning experience for them.
No, it would be. That's cool. No, it's a cool project. Yeah, that's awesome. What about fuel types? Like I mentioned, like Jasper earlier, for example, right? Like you look at an aerial photo of Jasper right now, and the pine beetle devastation around town is insane, right? Like it's just prime and ready for bad things to happen. Obviously there's no pine. There's no pine beetle for you guys to test with and stuff. Do you know of any kind of, besides just completely removal of dead pine or burning it, like is there anything, because I know it's a big deal down there in Jasper, right? Like people don't want you, it's in the park, people don't want you to go in and log it because it looks ugly, but they don't want you to burn it because that looks ugly, and also they don't want you to burn it because it's close to town, and I to find me one person that's, you know what I mean?
Well, they are logging.
Yeah, they're logging it now. Okay, yeah. So I don't know the situation down there. I just know that there's a big hubbub about what's going on. So
I don't know how extensive their logging plan is.
Yeah,
but around the community, for sure.
That's good. They need to, right? You can't burn that. I mean, find me somebody who's brave enough to light that match.
Yeah, and in a risk reward perspective, that would be a tricky one. But sort of scientifically, I think, unfortunately, we've had as a larger sort of fire behavior and science community. The last few years, I've had lots of experience with the sort of aftermath of pine beetle, and in previous years, some of that what they call red attacks, when the trees, like right now in Jasper, are bright red. there is a decent body of knowledge on that. In previous years, Dave, you guys did actually where you girdled some trees at Archer Lake and burned them?
We did an experiment when I was back with FP Innovations and along with Alberta, where we did girdle trees and then let
try
them
and
die.
simulate the pine beetle.
Yeah. So you actually just remove the sort of inner bark, and then eventually the trees sort of brown out.
Right.
And they were
pine
they
beetle.
were not lodgepole pine. They were Schroeder jack pine
Okay.
north of Fort McMurray. And we did a number of test burns where we were burning simultaneously with green trees and the girdle trees. And in our test burns, we didn't really see a difference. Certainly they were more flammable, but we didn't see a huge difference in rate of spread.
Oh, okay.
Now, having said that, Dan's colleague Dan Parakis in British Columbia has got a lot more observations from fire crews in the BC situation, and they've noted that it can be, I think, around 2.5 times faster.
Yep, that's
during
right.
the red phase.
Right.
But then once those needles are gone,
Yeah.
it changes because you don't have that canopy fuel.
Right.
So that's kind of like a Firesmart treatment.
Yeah.
When you're thinning, you're removing some of that canopy fuel.
Yeah.
And we have some fairly good ideas about what are thresholds for how much canopy fuel you need to sustain what we call an active crown fire. So those are the ones you see on TV with the roaring flames and stuff.
Yeah.
So below that, you can have trees candling and have a partial or what we call an intermittent crown fire, which is on the threshold of what suppression resources can manage if they're there and if they have sufficient firepower.
It's basically a ground fire where you have the odd individual or a group of trees that goes up and then kind of goes back down to the ground. It's not a sustained...
Kind of responds to wind gusts and changes in terrain and those kind of things. So the long-term challenge for pine beetle is this gray phase.
Yeah.
When the trees are dead and then they start tipping over.
Yeah.
And then you're getting these hybrid kind of fire behavior between standing dread and lots of fuel on the ground. And then
that's what I'm wondering is that the long term.
And then the bark starts flaking off.
Yeah.
And
and it's impossible to move, and it's extremely hazardous to work in any sort of wind because there's all sorts of trees coming down.
Yeah.
So you guys don't have, I know you said you had like some aspen slash.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the same as pine. Obviously, it's totally different. It's going to burn completely opposite. But, do you guys know of any attempt to try and model that kind of stuff, or try and maybe do a test burn in maybe something like that?
BC had a research site.
Yeah.
And they had done a few test burns on it, and I don't know if they are still going to do any gray attack burns. There's lots of data that they got last year.
Yeah, there's lots of observations
just
of
from
fire
wildfires.
behavior,
So
right,
and there is another one of Dan's colleagues, Chris Stockdale, is undertaking some work to analyze that fire behavior from last year and try and develop more fuel types.
No, and that's the thing. It's an infinite number of fuel types, right? I mean, it's always changing, and ecosite has to play it. How moist is the ground, and how it slopes.
Yeah,
and
rocket science is much easier. It's just one tube full of gas or a rocket propellant, and that's it.
Neil deGrasse Tyson might have something to say about that, but
I'll go toe to toe with him. Maybe astronomy is, but it's still physics. It's pretty simple. It's just
simple, yeah. We can tell ourselves that, anyways. So we're coming up on an hour already. So if there's, is there anything else you guys want to discuss, maybe that you think is important about the Pelican Mountain project that's unique or promote?
Well, I just want to touch on a little bit what Dan talked about with the notion of changing or having different species.
Yeah.
So we're trying to think and taking more of an approach that Firesmart is not a one-shot treatment, and we're trying to think more about planning and managing a stand as a less fire-prone environment. And so one of the things, as Dan mentioned, that we're looking at is can we promote this sphagnum moss, peat moss? can we promote that? So we've got McMaster University there setting up a formal research project.
Right. Promote the growth of the sphagnum.
Yeah,
okay.
and what was interesting was the 2015 burn that we did at Red Earth. There were parts of it where there was hardly any fire. And that was in the untreated part that was supposed to burn like crazy.
Right.
And we looked at it closely, and there was all kinds of sphagnum moss. And then Dan's a peatland scientist, and some of the other McMaster folks said, well, hey, you can have more of this stuff.
Yeah.
We can make it grow. So so it's great. So we have this formal project going.
Cool.
And then some of the Slave Lake folks were interested in promoting tamarack as an alternate species. So we're also looking at that. And those are the kind of things that when you're not just saying, well, we're going to thin pile, prune, burn, we want to start looking at, well, where's a stand going to be in after the treatment? Where's it going to be in 5 years?
How often do you do it?
Where's it going to be in 20 years? And we have been doing this now in Alberta for quite a long time, and some of the folks in the different forest areas are going back and retreating some sites. And one of their questions is when do we go back?
Yeah.
And so that's, again, where the modeling side of it can help us a little bit, because we don't want to wait for 15, 20 years. Yeah. Although we do have intentions to do some of that at Pelican Mountain as well. Right. So,
because needless to say, as much, mechanical work you do in a stand, there's a seed bed, and trees tend to like to come back.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much for them to, especially if you have like aspen seed or something or even pine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, like doesn't take long for them to grow.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention for folks is that we're talking about these treatments, and we're doing them around communities, and we do have an extensive program in Alberta, but it's not thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares. It's small patches of land around communities. So it's not wholesale ecosystem change on a very broad scale. It's very small, localized treatments, but across Alberta. So we do treatments in the Crow's Nest Pass, and we do them around Rainbow Lake.
Yeah.
All the way from...
So the high hazard areas, you focus on those?
Well, every community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, around every community. Focus on
So I think it's important to not to give this impression that we're doing wholesale changes to vast landscapes.
Of course, yeah.
Although, having said that, in some cases where it's appropriate, natural fire or prescribed fire would be welcome, and then that can help to mitigate potentially big fires. And that's a huge discussion in the States now, where their dry belt conifers forests are just so flammable now.
Yeah.
And so what we have in the boreal forest is also very flammable, but it's a different climate, different vegetation, different topography.
Yeah. No, for sure.
And I do also really want to mention one of the partners that I hadn't discussed earlier, and that is the Big Stone Cree First Nation out of Wabasca.
Oh yeah.
So this is part of their traditional lands.
Yeah.
And so they're an important partner with this project, and we work with them on setting this project up, and they're out there in the winter doing some of the heavy lifting and doing the mulching and those kind of things. So
that's awesome.
It's really great to have them be a part of this as well.
For sure, you got to have them involved, right? Because they have
and their crews are out there seeing when we're doing mulch burns and that kind of thing. So they're learning firsthand what some of this stuff does. How these Firesmart treatments work.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, the more people you can bring into it, the more different stakeholders and stuff. It gets broadens your view, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Dan, anything you want to say? Any final thoughts?
Probably good. Just reflecting on Dave's point previously, where we have some plots probably that will burn after Dave retires, and it's very much like a forestry experimental design to sort of, in the same way that a forester has to think about the trees 100 years from now, or a couple harvest cycles from now. We're also planning out these burning experiments for maybe when I'm retiring or something like that in another 20 years. So it the scale even though the plot itself is, only it's about 3 kilometers to the north, south, and a few kilometers wide. Maybe not spatially huge, but in terms of time, and what's the maintenance cycle for these things? How do we have to? So we are sort of thinking long term, and this is an area that it's noted land in a provincial sort of land inventory to say, hey, you can't just put a power line through here or whatever. Like it's sort of designated experimental space, and it is something that I hope when I'm hanging up my hat another 23 years, that I'll be able to phone up some of the old retirees and stuff like that and say, hey, let's go all Pelican and see what's going on. And
it's funny that you have an exact number. You've already got this.
Oh yeah, so I'm a federal civil servant, so we sort of have a pretty precise schedule here, but not like podcast producers. I'm sorry. Yeah,
this is definitely not my main gig.
But it is a long term experiment, and because these challenges will be with us from now and certainly 23 years and another 23 after that. We're gonna and as we're seeing more and more fire on the landscape in the past, say, 10 years in Alberta and elsewhere in Canada, there's no indications that is going to get any easier. So this is the sort of robust experiment that is like looking to the future and trying to see what we're going to have to deal with.
Oh, you need to. I mean, the forest is dynamic, right? Constantly changing, and with climate change, we don't even know. Like we have, what I mean? We don't know what the future is going to hold for us. So yeah, I know it's important to always be anticipating what might be happening next. So at least we're kind of ready for it.
Yeah, and we bring in all these partners and all sorts of folks that are younger than me. I don't even feel that old, but all sorts of younger folks than me, and so they'll carry the torch. And maybe I'll set up my retirement cabin, off the Alpac Hall Road there, with a nice view on the hill overlooking the plots.
We'll get another sea can out there. Call it Dan's place.
So, yeah.
It's a couple nice ponds too.
Oh yeah, there's some good stuff around there.
It's not a bad place. It's beautiful country.
Yeah. It really is.
Wabasca Lake's got some of the best fishing that I've ever had.
That's true. Yeah, it's great paddling in the Wabasca River there too. So maybe that'll be it.
Definitely. Nice. Well, thanks a lot for doing this, guys. This is good. We lots to talk about, right? I'm sure you guys could keep going too, but at some point we've got to shut it down.
We haven't covered all the projects that we're doing at the site.
I know. It's just that, unless we want to have a 3-hour podcast. This isn't the Joe Rogan experience. People aren't going to listen that long. So thanks a lot for coming on, guys. It was awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you liked that. I know I did. A lot of information, a lot of good information. Can't wait to maybe have them on again in the future, talk more about this project. Don't forget to rate and review on iTunes, comment, all that good stuff. I'm on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you've just been listening to this on the website, you can go on there and you can listen to it on your phone. It's a little more easy to download, all that kind of stuff. Also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Check it out. Share it with your friends. I'd appreciate it. Really helps me out a lot. Really, really does. So thanks a lot, guys. We will see you soon.